A young doctor begins a year of internship at a prestigious New York hospital. Will it be a dream job or a nightmare? Welcome to ReachMD Book Club. I'm your host, Dr. John Russell, and I'm joined by author Dr. Matt McCarthy, who is author of the book, The Real Doctor Will See You Shortly. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So as a person, what drew you to go to medical school?
You know, it was one of these things that kind of happened randomly, where I went to college, went to Yale as an undergrad, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I took a pretty broad range of classes, and I ended up being pretty good at chemistry, and that led to biochemistry, and that led to me working in a lab. And I remember working in that lab as a junior, and I thought, wow, I'd love to be a principal investigator and have my own lab. And one of the people in that that I was working with said, you know, it's really hard to be a successful lab person. Why don't you go to medical school? That way, if you still like research, you can do it. And if it turns out you're not very good at research, you've got an MD and you can see patients. And at 20 years old, that sounded very reasonable. And so I was fulfilling the pre-med requirements anyway by virtue of being a biochem major. And next thing I knew, I found myself in medical school, having done reasonably well on the MCAT, and it was something that I really hadn't planned for that long. A lot of the people in my classes had been dreaming of being a doctor for a long time, or they had a physician in the family, or they had some sort of illness as a child that inspired them to go and become a doctor. I didn't have that. I just wanted to be good at something, and that's kind of the path that led me down to science and to medicine. And next thing I knew, I was in medical school and saying, holy cow, what am I doing here? And I kind of freaked out a little bit.
And it seems like in the book you were kind of wrestling between being a surgeon or being a general internist. What did you end up decide to do?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big decisions that all medical students have to make is, are you somebody who likes to do procedures? Are you more of a doer, or are you more of a thinker? And I was okay using my hands, but I didn't really like it. I didn't really love being in the operating room. And you learn very quickly that if you can imagine being happy outside of the operating room, then you're probably not meant to be a surgeon and to have that really specific type of life. And, I realized it wasn't for me. And so while it was thrilling, while it was exciting to get to be in the operating room, after a 3-month rotation, I thought, I'm pretty good. That was a great 3 months, but I don't think I need to do that anymore.
So where did you end up doing your internal medicine residency that's captured in the book?
Yeah, so I graduated from Harvard Med in 2008, and 2 weeks later I started my internal medicine residency at Columbia Presbyterian on 168th Street in Manhattan. And it was the bright lights in the big city. I'd never really spent that much time in New York. And the transition was really jarring, both personally, to be in such a big city. I was suddenly living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and then professionally to go from kind of the idyllic medical school situation to suddenly working 30-hour shifts and being a zombie for a very, very long period of time.
So this account of your first year, were you writing as the year went on?
I was keeping notes very closely and keeping a journal, and I wanted to document, for my own sake, what I was going through and what it was like. And it was a really powerful time just to be seeing all of this humanity, really. And I kept an incredibly detailed journal until something somewhat bad happened to me in the fall of my intern year. And it was this basically the second half of my book where I have this needle stick and my life gets upended. And at that point it was such a painful period for me that I stopped writing about it.
So what year were you an intern?
2008, the 2008 to 2009 academic year.
So was this kind of the intern 16-hour work days? And
it was definitely pre that. When people joke about the days of the giants, and I certainly wasn't a giant, but I got to work at a time where it was expected that we do 30-hour shifts every fourth night, and I was really a zombie for a good part of that intern year. And now, I'm an assistant professor at Cornell, and I just came from rounds with my general medicine team here, and the interns can't work more than 16 hours. And the second and third years, I believe the cap is 24 hours. And I think that's a good thing. I don't know how much was gained in that hour 24 to hour 30.
So what did you expect? Were you one of these folks who, boy, I'm going to start internship and it's going to be horrific, or were you one of these folks who, it's all going to work itself out?
I felt like I was jumping out of an airplane with a parachute and an instructor strapped to you. And they were telling me, like, this is going to be crazy, but you're going to get through it. You're going to survive. You're going to land on the ground. But it's going to be really weird and really hard, and you're going to be scared. And that's kind of how it was. It was like jumping out of an airplane. And, for a large part of it, I felt like I was in free fall and not really knowing what I was doing. But then I also had a team of really talented supervisors, whether it was second-year residents or third years or fellows or attendings, to kind of guide me through it and reassure me in those really crucial periods. But it was a terrifying and inspiring year.
Well, it was nice that they started you off in the ICU, right? So, it's very much kind of jumping out of the airplane. Do you want to talk a little bit about the ICU and Dr. Baio?
Yeah. So I still am very close with him. I talk with him all the time, and I talked with him before the book was coming out, and I said, I'm going to write about what that first month was like. And he said, oh, geez, you didn't know anything. And I said, yeah, I know. And I thought that you knew everything. And he said, oh, I didn't know everything. And I said, but from my eyes, as someone who just got the term doctor attached to his name, and I realized that I didn't know how to make many of the medical decisions, and that I turned to you for so many of them, I kind of glorified this guy who was really just a year ahead of me and who seemed so incredibly competent. And, I had never really set foot in the cardiac care unit before. It's not part of the mandatory, curriculum for a medical student to graduate. So suddenly I was in this ICU with 18 of the sickest patients in the world, or in the hospital at least, and they were on, ventricular assist devices. They were waiting for transplants. They were constantly having their heart stops or going into these crazy arrhythmias. And I was overwhelmed, and I felt very fortunate to have somebody there who could really guide me through that. But I was terrified.
He certainly had a Yoda type kind of feel in the book, if in my interpretation.
And that's what I've been touring the country talking to residents and medical students about the book, and so many of them say that they feel that way when they're third year medical students or fourth years or interns, and they're terrified of the idea that in just a very short period of time they're going to be expected to be that Yoda, or they're going to be expected to be this person with wisdom when they don't feel like they really have it. And I still feel that way as the attending on service, that people turn to me with really tough questions, and I'm expected to have some wisdom, and whether or not I have that remains to be seen.
You're listening to ReachMD Book Club. We're talking with author Dr. Matt McCarthy with his book, The Real Doctor Will See You Shortly. So there's a patient of Benny Santos who is a recurring figure in the book, and it's very kind of nice how he kind of intersperses with you. I found a beautiful humanity in your kind of really not knowing how to approach him in the beginning. You want to talk a little about him?
Yeah, my first day as a doctor, I'm in the cardiac care unit, and there's 18 patients, and 17 of them are on ventilators or, on these incredibly powerful medications, and they're not really conscious. And then there was one guy in the corner just riding a stationary bike watching Judge Judy on TV. And he just looked so out of place, and I went over and introduced myself, and he was waiting for a heart transplant. And he'd been waiting a long time, and he was going to continue to wait for a very long time. And it was this kind of parallel journey that I thought we were on, where he was waiting for a heart, and I jokingly felt like I was waiting for a brain, to have the medical knowledge to be a real doctor. And what I discovered was, as our time went by, he spent months and months and years in the hospital, that it was not fair to make this comparison, that we were on some journey together, because with every passing day, I was acquiring more medical knowledge, more skill, more ability to be a doctor. But the passing of the calendar didn't really bring anything to him. He was just sitting there watching TV, waiting for a heart transplant that might not ever come. And it was a very strange situation. And, I don't want to spoil how things turn out, but I can tell you that he and I are still very close, and we text each other now, and that's 7 years after we met each other. And I think that, you don't often get that now with the way that the medical system works, that if, as a physician or as a student, if you meet somebody in the hospital, it's a very transitory experience. You see them for a couple of days and they're gone. And this is a guy who 7 years later, I'm still very much invested in his life, and he's invested in mine. And, he asks how my son is doing and stuff like that. So it was a really nice thing for me to get to meet someone like that.
And you alluded to your needle stick, which certainly seemed to kind of be this cloud that hung over a lot of the book. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was on my infectious disease rotation. I was drawing blood on a patient who had HIV, and I had a syringe full of that man's blood, and I mistakenly stuck it into my finger. And suddenly, the HIV virus was injected into my body, and I didn't know how much of it was there or how long it would be there or what was going to happen. And suddenly I went from being someone who was trying to learn how to take care of patients to a guy who was taking 11 pills a day trying to learn how to take care of myself. And, I went from being this very cavalier person saying things like, I don't understand why people with HIV don't take their medications, to being the guy who was dreading taking my HIV medications, and the fact that they were making me feel nauseated and having diarrhea and vomiting. And, I was taking them to prevent the virus from taking hold in my body, not because I had contracted it. And it was, a prophylactic thing for me. But for a month, I was as miserable physically as anyone could possibly be. And it was, a chunk of the book is dedicated to what is it like when you have, you've got the mental exhaustion of trying to be a doctor, and then you've got the physical exhaustion and torment of, being ill. And I had no appetite, and I lost weight, and I felt lousy. And the interesting part is that those experiences led me to be interested in infectious diseases and led me to go on to become an HIV doctor. And I'm an infectious disease specialist now. And part of that is because I got to see what these patients go through, and I became very interested in that life.
So one of the things in the book that stood out to me is the thing that probably made my blood boil the most is, a day or two after having your needle stick, you have a chief resident at a resident Ballant group wanting to have a talk on needle sticks, and not the emotions of needle sticks, but chastising all type of thing.
That is the way that a lot of hospitals work, is that when something happens that's unfortunate or something happens that's bad, rather than dealing with the human element of it, it's how do we address this to show that we care about this issue? And so we'll have a workshop, or we'll have a meeting, or we'll have a this, so that we can show others that we take this seriously. And in my case, they had this workshop to show everyone how to draw blood, because clearly guys like Matt McCarthy didn't know what they were doing. And that made me feel even worse. And, I'm just so used to that kind of response in medicine. When we get, dinged on our hospital evaluation by patients by saying that we're not good communicators, the response is to make us, go to a workshop on how to communicate better. And there's always some sort of knee-jerk response that's not necessarily the right one. And I felt that kind of a response, all it did was make me feel, I didn't think I could feel worse, but that made me feel worse.
In medicine, we're often attracted to a little bit of gallows humor. There are some very funny moments in the book. Is there something that stood out to you, though, as kind of the, one of the kind of the funniest kind of dark moments of that year?
There's a moment from that year that I actually, it ended up on the cutting room floor of Random House's editorial room, which is, we were first-year doctors, and there was a dead bird in the hallway, and it just stayed there for day after day after day. And we were like, this is one of the best hospitals in the world. And we always saw the sign, the motto of the hospital is amazing things are happening here. And after several days, a sign appeared above the bird, and it said, security knows about the bird. So rather than removing it, they just said, we know, we're on it. And people would just kind of walk around, the doctors, and we would, instead of saying amazing things are happening here with an exclamation, we would say it more with a question mark. And, those little moments like that really actually build camaraderie among the healthcare workers, that, they're working so hard, so tired, so exhausted. And you see little moments of dark humor like that, and you just start giggling and kind of just, we're all in it together. And I think that was one of the things I tried to have shine through in the book, is just how much we relied on each other and how much I relied on my co-interns and my colleagues to get through the days, because there were days where I didn't want to be there. I just wanted to go home and watch TV or have a glass of wine. But I was in the middle of a 30-hour shift, and someone would go and take me to Wendy's or go give me a Frosty or do something to pick me up. And that's a really special thing about medicine, is how we interact with each other.
One of the things that made me saddest about the book is I really don't have the sense in reading the book that your attendings really were kind of there for you emotionally, at least as portrayed in the book. You being an attending now, because I'm a attending teaching physician, and I would be horrified if my residents portrayed me in a kind of a not caring way. How have you broken the cycle now if you're an attending teaching physician?
Well, that's a really hard thing to do, because the attendings I had at Columbia is kind of an old school place, and it's I got through it, so you'll get through it. And that really changed, I think, in the last year. What we're dealing with at Columbia, last August, after a long shift, one of the first-year doctors went home, climbed up to the top of a building in Manhattan and jumped off and killed himself. And 3 days later, an intern at Cornell, where I work, did the same thing. So we had dual suicides within 3 days. And it brought us, we all had these immediate faculty meetings to try to address this and say, what are we doing to our young doctors? And what are we doing to our first-year physicians? And, the colleagues, the attendings broke into two camps. There was one camp that said these were mental health issues. These were isolated and regrettable events, but this was about mental health. And then there was another camp, which I was a part of, which said, we're kidding ourselves if we chalk this simply up to mental health. Look, both of these kids, and they were really just kids, killed themselves after long shifts, 20-hour shifts in the ICU. It's not like they did this while they were on vacation. And so it really led to a lot of soul-searching, I think, among all of the faculty, both at Columbia and Cornell. And, we have this new motto called Walk the Dog, and the idea is that there are some residents that have dogs, and they literally have to go outside of the hospital and walk their dogs for 10 minutes, and that we should all feel as though we could take 5 or 10 minutes for our own mental health or our own sanity. And whether or not that's doing anything, I don't know, but I think the culture is changing, that we're not trying to treat residency training like it's boot camp, where you break people down and then build them back up. We're just trying a little bit to just build them up. And whether or not that's going to make for a different type of doctor, I don't know. But I think that there has been a subtle culture change because of those events of last August.
And I really think in reading it, I was really kind of hearkened to House of God, which, back when I trained, there were a lot of kind of similarities and a lot of parallels. And I think it's, to me, and I think that's a great compliment, is that it has a modern kind of House of God feel to it. And did you kind of wrestle with any of that when you were writing it?
Well, when I was a first-year medical student, one of my best friends in the class gave me House of God, and I started reading it, and I got probably 25 pages into it, and I said, I should be reading this, but not right now. I don't know that, as I've seen like one patient in my life. I think I need to wait. So I'm actually not really familiar with the ins and outs of House of God to know whether or not it's a modern take on things. But what I do know is how that just from reading the beginning of it is how patients were portrayed in that. And I was very careful to try to portray patients carefully. And, one of the Grand Rounds talks I gave one last month on the ethics of doctors writing about patients. And I think it's a very tricky area. And, there's a lot of discussion now about should a physician write about a patient if he or she does not have written consent? If you change details, is that sufficient? Because we have this very special relationship, with patients where we're not just journalists reporting a story. We've got to protect people. And I think that it's going to be an ongoing discussion because people want to know what it's like to be a doctor and what we're going through and what these cases are like. And we have to do it in a respectful way.
And I think it's a wonderful book, and I think anyone who is interested in what it's like to be kind of a young doctor in our kind of very modern times and lots of technologies and sometimes disconnect between everything. I think it's just a wonderful read. I think there is some kind of humor and certainly lots of heart and lots of humanism, and a wonderful book. The author is Dr. Matt McCarthy, and the book is The Real Doctor. We'll see you shortly. Doctors, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, thank you so much. This was great.